Live, where news comes first. This is ABC-7 Extra.
Good evening, I'm Maria Garcia. Glad you're with us tonight. Here we are again. Voters brought in a sweeping partisan change nationally in this last election. And in Texas, after one of the most organized, fervent efforts to turn the state blue, the Lone Star State is Republican still. So what's happened? Charismatic gubernatorial candidate Wendy Davis drew less than 39% of the vote, which was the best performance by a Democrat statewide. That's down almost 3.5 points from Bill White's finish in 2010. So if she and the very organized movement around her couldn't turn Texas blue, can anyone? And how much of it has to do with voter apathy? Are there really two Americas, one that votes during presidential elections, the other during midterms, with very different ideological politics? We're going to be talking about all of this tonight, getting very different perspectives from our guests. State Senator Jose Rodriguez, a Democrat, and former Republican state rep and current president of the EPISD Board of Managers, Margo. You can tweet me your questions at MariaGABC7 or tweet with the hashtag ABC7 Extra. You can also call us at 496-1775 or email us at ABC7Extra@KVIA.com. Before our discussion, though, let's get an overview of what changed this election.
We have more voters than Greg Abbott does.
Wendy Davis in El Paso days before the election. Confident Texas demographics are on the Democrat side, but all of the major statewide and that crucial congressional race going Republican. All of the state's top offices will get new occupants. The politics, though, won't change.
We are a pretty red state. We're pretty independent. There's a lot of opportunities. We lead the nation in job growth.
Former Republican State Rep Margo says it's a testament that voters just are not dissatisfied with the way Texas is being run.
That's countered, I think, by the cynical point of view that is, why would I vote when there's really no reason out there for me to vote? I mean, I can cast my vote as a Democrat, and I'm just outnumbered by all the Republican votes.
Political analyst and professor Dr. Greg Rocha says it's about demographics. Exit polls show older, white men showed up to the polls more, he says. And Texas Democrats, he says, are historically apathetic about voting in midterms, especially in Texas, where the road is so steep against them.
But I look at it as a building opportunity. It's a building year for 2016.
Democrat State Rep-elect Cesar Blanco cruised to victory in heavily Democratic El Paso, and though his party lost badly, he says that doesn't mean they didn't make strides, considering left-leaning younger voter turnout increased statewide from 9% to about 15%, he says.
For me, it's about building relationships and working with the other side. At the end of the day, we have to govern together.
Okay, let's start our discussion now. Joining us, State Senator Jose Rodriguez, former Republican state rep and current president of the EPISD Board of Managers, Margo. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Sure, thank you.
Senator, I want to start with you. There was an increase in young voters. You had a very viable, charismatic gubernatorial candidate who was even recognized nationally for her very famous filibuster. Yet with all the efforts from the Democrats, you couldn't get just one of them in a statewide office. What happened? Can anyone in the future?
Well, I think it's clear from all of the analysis as to what happened. I think it was just mentioned in the opening piece here. Traditionally, historically, in the midterm elections, you have less turnout than you do in the presidential years. And the turnout in the midterms election is, in fact, more white men coming out, whereas in the presidential years, in 2016, you will see more minorities, more younger people, and even more women come out to vote. Now, as to what happened, I think, we need to start with the fact that it was a clean sweep by the Republican Party. They won it very clearly. Nobody can dispute the strength of the party showing. But it doesn't mean that the Democrats don't have any hope in the future. I think that a lot of people stayed at home. A lot of people here in El Paso, for example, I did some door knocking 3 or 4 days right before the election with my wife Carmen, and people are still complaining about the ballpark. They're complaining about Obama. They're complaining about all these other things that are not related to the state party leadership, and so it tells you that they're not really focused on what the election was all about.
And we're going to talk about that sort of education and age and how that has to do with voting trends. But speaking about hope, you heard Greg Rocha saying Democrats feel a little bit hopeless in Texas. They feel that the road to victory is so steep against them. They get complacent and they said, why should I vote? I'm outnumbered by Republicans anyway. Is that true? And if it's true, how do you change that?
Well, there is some of that attitude out there. I don't think we can discount that. But I think overall you will see a different result in the next 2 years. That's what we've come to expect here in the way politics plays out in America. I think that voters are very finicky. There were, you know, this particular election year was very strange because you have, you know, a very vastly improving economy. You have more people covered under the Affordable Care Act than have ever been insured before. You have all kinds of indicators that the country is on the right track.
There are signs that the economy is getting better, but wages are flat.
Well,
and that's what Americans feel mostly. And we're going to get to that. But Dee, I want to ask you, we've been hearing a lot about this idea that there are two Americas. Left-leaning voters come out generally in numbers more during presidential elections, whereas more conservative, older, white voters come out during midterm elections, and this creates sort of this cycle back and forth. What do you think about that?
Well, I've listened to the same pundits everybody else has, and they study the demographics, and I'm not here to argue, but I think it's a combination of a lot of things going on. I stated before when you and I visited that I thought the perception in Texas was things are going pretty well. So from that standpoint overall, I don't think there was a lot to drive a lot of people to the polls, irrespective of party. And then when you turn around and look at the top of the party and the hits that the president as the leader of the Democratic Party is taking on a national basis, that would discourage and dissuade probably advocates of his positions or his party. But you know, I'm not sure. El Paso is very unique. I think the issue on straight party voting, straight ticket voting, diminishes the thought process for people to engage into the in candidate selection. Half the time when you interview somebody after they voted, especially in a non-off-year election, all they can talk about is the president that they voted for and not any down-ballot elections. And those are some of the most critical. But then again, we look at the nonpartisan elections that we have, not just city council, but look at the school districts, which whereas the majority of the money that goes from your tax dollars goes to your schools, and we have single-digit turnout also with school board elections. So
dismal
it's
voting.
You know, I'm not sure it's all because of the midterm, because of Republican, because of Democrat. I think there's a mindset out there that we don't have fully informed voters about individual candidates.
Now, Greg Rocha is saying that has to do with age and education. The more education you have, the more likely you are to vote. So is it an issue of increasing education in your community? And how do you even do that? I mean, that's just, everybody's trying to do that.
I think there ought to be more effort expended on civics and government and understanding the process, and that you do have a say in the process and what your sacred right as a voter is to vote. And it should be, in my opinion, a moral obligation. But it's not treated as that, and the focus isn't there. You know, the trite response is, well, it doesn't count, or it makes no difference. Well, I mean, you got to understand the big picture, the process, and lock into individual candidates to determine the impetus to vote.
Okay. Senator, Texas, as red as it was before the election, the Republican Party going to take this as a mandate from voters, saying they have their blessing to move forward with their agenda in the state legislature. So how does an all-Democratic delegation from El Paso pass meaningful legislation in a very Republican legislature?
Well, let me answer that, but I want to respond to something that Dee said about the straight ticket party voting. The implication being that Democrats vote straight ticket. and that people aren't informed about the people that they're voting for when they vote straight ticket. The fact of the matter is, and the El Paso Times did an article here recently before the election, that both parties engage in straight party ticket voting. In fact, it pointed out that the Republican Party in Texas has higher numbers, a disproportionate number of people voting straight ticket than Democrats do. Here in El Paso, for example, it's estimated we had about 54% straight ticket voting.
In the past, we've had up to 80% Democratic.
Well, we
straight
got
ticket.
54% in this election, but in 9 out of the 15 largest counties, counties like Montgomery County, McLennan County, out there where Waco is, you had in Montgomery County 70% Republican straight ticket voting. In McLennan County, you had close to 60%.
Well, for
the point is that, and as one Republican pointed out, you know, we vote straight ticket because we think our candidates are the best candidates on the ballot. I got a mailer from Christy Craddock with the Railroad Commission in my house, a very glossy piece urging people to vote straight Republican.
My comment is irrespective of party. I don't think there ought to be straight ticket voting, period.
Well,
and I've said that, and I advocated against it when I was in the legislature.
Sure.
But that's my point. But it is a mindless vote because it allows you only to vote for the party and not to go down. But I don't care if you want to vote all the same party, but at least go down and vote for each person.
Except that some voters, including myself, look at the party platforms. And when you look at the Republican platform, there's a lot of things in there that are not acceptable to what I would consider my constituents, a vast number of constituents here in El Paso.
Well, I don't want to debate the platform. And I don't vote for a platform. I've always voted for an individual. Quite candidly, I'll vote for a Democrat. I don't have a problem with that if I consider that individual better qualified and more competent. And in certain cases, as there was here on several occasions, there's not even a Republican to vote for.
Well,
so,
let me then answer your question about the how do you work together.
I do want to get to that. We have to get to our first commercial
sure.
break, but we'll get to that when we come back. So we're going to talk about how a Democratic delegation works in a very Republican legislature. We're also going to talk about how national politics affect state races, a very close race we saw in Texas in District 23. We're going to talk about that. If you'd like to share your comments or you have questions for our guest, remember you can call our comment line 496-1775. You can also email us at ABC7Extra@KVIA.com or tweet me at MariaGABC7 or use the hashtag ABC7Extra. You're watching ABC7 Extra, where news comes first. Welcome back, everyone. We're talking Texas politics today. Joining me still, Democratic State Senator Jose Rodriguez and Margo, who was a former state rep and who is now the president of the EPISD Board of Managers. We were talking about the El Paso delegation. How does a Democratic delegation pass meaningful legislation in a Republican-controlled legislature?
Well, simply by building the relationships that Cesar Blanco was talking about and trying to reach across the aisle to reach consensus, compromise on legislation. And I think we need to distinguish Maria, between legislation that is local and that is of significance to our community, to our constituents, versus statewide legislation that is sometimes more on the philosophical or ideological spectrum. So that what I mean by that, for example, is my first session in 2011, I passed 40 bills. This last session in 2013, I passed 50 bills. Now, you can't pass those bills without reaching across the aisle and getting support. Dan Patrick, who's coming in as Lieutenant Governor, for example, Chairman of the Education Committee, supported 5 of the 6 school reform bills that I passed pertaining to the cheating scandal here at the El Paso Independent School District. He supported them. And I mean, I had to talk to him. By the same token, I came around to House Bill 5, as a lot of other Democrats did, after he was willing to make some accommodations and some changes. And so that's how you do it. I mean, you have to, on those kinds of bread and butter issues that are important to our community, the Health Science Center bill, you know, I passed the amendment that allowed the $10 registration fee for El Paso County that is giving us a lot of road funding. You can get things done if you really set your mind to it. Now, the other kinds of issues that are social issues, you know, guns on campus, you know, pro-choice, anti-choice. Those kinds of issues are more problematical because people are pretty much set on their philosophical perspective on those things.
We're going to talk a little bit about social issues in a bit, especially how a lot of Republicans this time around in this election really strayed from social issues in the campaign trail, really focused on economic issues. But Dee, I want to ask you, you've expressed some concern that the delegation is all Democratic in a very red state. The delegation, though, saying they reach across the aisle. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I echo what Senator Rodriguez said. You've got to develop relationships and reach across the aisle. From the House standpoint, the Senate is more of a deliberative body. They're more collegial. They actually kind of know what's going to happen before they get to the floor, and it's not a lot of heavy debates sometimes. In the House, it's more rock'em sock'em. There are 98 Republicans in this coming session, and there'll be 52 Democrats. So if you're going to get a bill passed, you dadgum well better develop some relationships with the other side. Now, right now in our delegation, we have two who are very credible across the aisle, Representative Pickett and Representative Marissa Marquez. They are credible on both sides of the aisle. The others have to work at it.
No, the senator just said, though, that he passed 40 in the last time, 50 bills.
I'm talking about the House. I'm going to refer to the House.
To the House.
He can comment on the Senate side. I'm referring to the House. We have 5 members now, with Cesar Blanco coming in as replacing Naomi Gonzalez, and so
Representative Gonzalez, Representative Moody, you think they're too aligned with the Democratic Party?
Well, based on what I've observed and heard from my former colleagues, I would say that they need to spend a little more energy and effort on developing the relationships that they need to get bills out of committee and onto the House floor.
What are your thoughts on that, Senator? I mean, you've worked with them.
No, with the House members? Mm-hmm. No, I think the House members, we have a pretty good delegation. There's no question. I think Cesar Blanco is going to be a tremendous addition to the delegation. We had periodic meetings during the session. We talked about the various bills. We look at the city's agenda, the chamber's agenda, the county's agenda beforehand. We select, what we think are going to be the priorities that we can work on. And we didn't really have any kind of blow-ups during the session as you used to hear or read about in the past. We have worked together, at least in the 2 sessions that I've been there. Now, I think that, what we're hearing is that the House members are more concerned about what's going to be happening in the Senate than over on the House side, ironically, Dee, simply because we've got 8 new senators coming in, which is an unheard of number for a 31-member body, whereas in the House there were a few more additions to the Republican side of the aisle, but pretty much it stayed the same. And so what I'm hearing is that people are going to be looking to the House for more balance as opposed to the Senate, which people look to in the past.
Okay.
But we'll have to wait and see about that.
Okay, we have some phone calls. Want to make sure we get to our phone lines. Marquez from the East Side on the phone. Hi, Marquez.
Yeah, I'm calling because I have a comment as far as most people in El Paso vote against along Democratic lines because it's tradition, and they're blinded by any of the issues. They're not really looking at the issues, and that's what affects us with not getting support from the state, because the state is primarily Republican, and El Paso should turn to Republican voting. Thank you.
Okay, that comment from Marquez. We also have a comment from Tina, I believe, on email. Are you seriously going to blame the losses Democrats had because of older white men and they voted more? It is more because the economy is under the GOP, and that's from Tina. I want to talk about the potential voting power of Latinos, right? You're always hearing that, that Latinos have a lot of voting power, but in fact, that's one reason the president considering executive powers and immigration, some would say, so that he doesn't lose that base come 2016. Yet, though, outside of presidential elections, generally, Latinos are not as engaged as other groups. In El Paso, voting generally dismal. How do you change that? And I'll leave the floor open to any of you.
Well, first of all, the voter turnout was low all across the state. It wasn't just in El Paso, even in bastions like Austin, Houston, Dallas, you name it. Everywhere it was lower than in the prior 2010 election. So that's number one. Number two, I think there's no question that the power of the Latino vote is only going to increase just by sheer numbers, demographic change. Right now, there is no question that we still have a lot of the Latino electorate, people who are registered to vote, not coming out to vote, not being informed, as we have both agreed, on the issues, on the candidates, and staying focused on an election. There's many reasons for that. You know, generally, I think everybody accepts as a cardinal principle that unless you can connect to a voter, regardless of who they are, Latino or otherwise, issues that are important to them, that hit them in the pocketbook, for example, and so forth, then they're just not interested.
Yeah.
And so I think what you had in this election was a tremendous I think Dee pointed out to the many hits that President Obama was taking. One of the things that surprised me is I was going door to door, I ran into several people that would say, no, I'm not going to vote because I'm not going to vote for Obama again.
Okay.
And I said, well, but this is not a vote for the president. This is for governor and lieutenant governor. This is state politics that we're talking about, state policies. Well, no, you know, I'm not voting for that reason.
Yeah, especially in the era of cable news, though, like national rhetoric dominates, I think, any political thought that people have. What do you think about that, Dee?
Well, I thought we were becoming the talking heads for El Paso. No, I agree. I mean, it got a little old. I mean, I changed stations after a while, but it was a lot of debate. And what was it this weekend? Everybody's still debating on why the pollsters were so wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to say. But the things you can deal with are at the local level. You know, Tip O'Neill, the former Speaker of the House back when Reagan was president, said all politics is local, and they're pocketbook issues. Well, we don't, you know, I'm going to beat this horse because I think it's so important. My hope is that if we can educate our voters well enough to vote for school trustees, then maybe they'll be engaged enough to vote for city council, for county commissioners, for state representatives, and all the way up. They'll be engaged. But you got to start somewhere.
Well, here's something.
But that's your dollars,
Yeah.
your tax dollar. 50% of your tax dollars goes to your schools.
Right.
Yet we're not engaged.
Right. I want to make sure we get to a phone call. Olga from the Northeast is on the phone. Hi, Olga. Your comment or your question?
Why do they not have candidates talking about issues? I tried to look them up and I couldn't find them on the computer.
Okay.
Candidates that I didn't know anything about. And it's difficult to find out information.
Okay, Olga, thank you so much about that.
The general wisdom applied by political consultants to candidates is be as obtuse and as general as you can so that the other side can't attack you on your particulars. I didn't usually advocate for that, but that's kind of a general. I think you would agree with that. That's what, you know, they all say, avoid that. Now, I think incumbents don't have a chance to do that because they've got a record that they're running on and their votes that were taken. But if you're a challenger and a first-time candidate, then you dodge because that's what you're
and
told.
You know, that's unfortunate because I feel like that's politics really hindering good policy decisions.
Well, it's up to you all in the media and others and voters to when they go to ask them the pointed questions that are important.
Well, but there's certain changes that we really have to consider making. In this election, the two most important positions, governor, lieutenant governor, we had 2 debates for the governor position and only 1 for the lieutenant governor. So in terms of the general electorate getting informed by the candidates, then when you do that, you're limiting the information for people out there. That's number one. Number two, we can't underestimate the power of money and the financing of campaigns and ideas. I think that in this election, more than ever before, we have seen millions and millions of dollars invested in TV ads, not so much by the candidates, but by these outside organizations these shadowy groups that nobody knows about
And, you
that
know,
are affecting and influencing,
Right.
as you pointed out earlier, Maria, the attitude of a local electorate.
And you know, I think that could be an hour-long show. I think it was Stanford University came out with a study that said that the U.S. no longer can qualify as a democracy, they say, because of all the money that goes into the elections. I think that's subjective, but let's talk about national politics. The District 23 race encompasses parts of the Lower Valley all the way to San Antonio. Democratic incumbent Pete Gallego lost by a sliver to Republican Will Hurd, one of the few tight races in the country. But we really saw Gallego, like a lot of Democrats, distancing himself from the Democratic Party, distancing himself from the president, focusing on local issues. Was that harmful to the Democrats, that there wasn't a unified national message, that they didn't stick behind their leaders? And does that make the Democratic Party weak?
Well, that is my view, as a matter of fact. I think, and in fact, some commentators have been making that observation, that it was perhaps a mistake on the part of the Democrats running nationwide, including Pete Gallego, in distancing themselves from the president. And you know, it's again the tremendous amount of money that was invested in painting President Obama as a weak leader, as someone who is not really attentive to the issues that are important to the citizens in this country. You know, the tremendous amount of banging on the Affordable Care Act.
But I mean, this isn't unique to President Obama. I mean, isn't this a cyclical thing? We've seen every president since World War II in their second term face a Congress dominated by the opposing party in their last 2 years. Generally, by the last 2 years of their second term, the president, any president, pretty unpopular because
the president personifies his party, whether you're Republican or Democrat. The president will personify the party at the highest level. So consequently, we had a situation this year when, yeah, there's a lot of people distancing themselves from that. But also on the Will Hurd race over in Congressional District 23, you had a more dominant voting population in San Antonio, more engaged than the marginal area we have here. That district is one of the weirdest looking districts you've ever seen as far as the way it's drawn. And so Will Hurd primarily had his focus on, and frankly, I'm a supporter of Will Hurd, and he came out, we visited. I think he'll make a great congressman with his CIA background, etc. But he focused. His strategy was to focus on turning out the vote in San Antonio,
right,
and a little bit here. He just wanted a little bit. He had an idea of what he wanted, and he did it. So,
well, I think the last time Pete won in El Paso with a vote in far east El Paso, I think all the commentators have agreed on that. You know, he won by about 3,000 votes or so. This time around, as we've already said, the voter turnout was low in all of El Paso County, including far east El Paso.
Okay.
And so that, and of course, this is a race that even before it got started, all the commentators were projecting it was going to be the most closely competitive race, closely watched and competitive race in the House of Representatives.
Okay.
And it ended up being that way.
Okay. Well, we are out of time for the show. Thank you so much for joining us. It goes by fast, doesn't it? Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Senator. We appreciate you. And thank you so much for joining us on ABC-7 Extra. We hope you found this informative and helpful. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.